Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Devin, Hasson, and David Wolman. Gentlemen, it is Monday right around noon, and guess what, guys? Week 1 is in the books. We actually have a full slate of high school football games to react to. The opening week is in the books. 5A and 6A have played their first set of games, and guys, we finally got to see it all in person. First off, just what was I had at least had a few trips out to Salina, earlier on just to kind of get acclimated to pandemic football. But what was it like for you guys being back out in the swing of things Thursday and Friday last week?
Felt so amazing to be out there again. I mean, who would have thought this would have happened 3 or 4 months ago? But I mean, it's obviously different, with the social distancing and just like the requirements that the kids have to do with all the testing. So, but I mean, like Thursday felt a little bit differently when I went to the Frisco Independence game because they had at Toyota Stadium, they still have the tarps from the Sarco matches on there from the FC Dallas that, has the fans like halfway up, the stands towards the top. Yeah. And then obviously like the seats of this press box were spread out like 6 feet. For sure. So, and they actually had sanitizer for every single person in there.
Okay, cool. Nice little touch.
Yeah, nice little touch. But, and then when I got to Lake Dallas on Friday, it kind of seemed more normal. It's like it's a small school atmosphere over there. So they had a 50% capacity, and like I probably saw I looked down at the crowd and like pretty much everybody was wearing a mask. So I mean, good job by Lake Dallas's fans. Devin,
how about you, man? Just business as usual for you out in Mesquite?
It felt, and I was talking with some of the people in the press box, it felt like it had been 3 years since we'd seen one another. Just because the way, when high school sports was shut down was right as we kind of get into our soccer coverage, when the playoffs are about to get heated up and whatnot. And time is just dragged from a sports perspective, from our sports perspective, with having everything canceled. And they were getting back in the thick of it. It really was a lot kind of business as usual for them. I mean, obviously we had the seats blocked off and the capacity, but at Mesquite Memorial, capacity is 20,000, so you can still get a pretty good crowd out there. Yeah. I know some school districts erred on the side of caution. I guess I should say in terms of limiting the band, no drill team, the Mesquite schools had their drill team. They had their inflatables they ran out with. They had the cheerleaders. Friday night Coppell brought their band. I don't think it was their full band, but they, being down there on the field afterwards and seeing the teams run over to sing the school song, and there was a sense of normalcy that was kind of refreshing after everything that's been that we've been through. And I mean, hopefully we can keep things smooth sailing.
Cross our fingers.
And we actually have a full slate of games to react to. And you always want to caution just any sort of knee-jerk or overreactions based on Week 1, especially coming off what these teams have been through in the offseason and just how abnormal everything was from a preparation standpoint. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean there weren't some very, very noteworthy storylines to emerge from that first week. So, I mean, where do we want to start, guys? I mean, do we want to start with a shocking upset to the number 2 team in the state in 5A Division I? Do we want to start with a potential game of the year candidate? With at least within our coverage area, as far as where I was at on Friday, do we want to talk about some of our regrets on the picket line for the very first week? Let's let's start with Lone Star. Let's talk about this one. Wow. This was kind of the first major domino to fall of the season. And on Thursday, North Forney 34, Frisco Lone Star 31. Not exactly something that we would have foreseen coming, especially with Lone Star looking to build off a state semifinal appearance and just the success that they had last year. And I mean, just to kind of look at the way that this game materialized, I mean, just you think of everything that kind of Lone Star has prided itself on, and just lockdown defense and just efficient offense, and it was such an atypical performance in just about every respect, so uncharacteristic. I mean, in the sense that on the third play of scrimmage, a pick 6 by North Forney. And just like that, your first shot's fired. They get a couple long scoring plays later on, 41 yards to Cam Allen, 76 yards to Tyler Tucker. And you just don't associate, the Lone Star defense with their reputation as giving up plays like that. And then before you know it, it's 21-3 early in the second quarter, North Forney, and you're already sounding the upset alarm. And, I mean, I don't know if Devin, if you can, from what you're able to take away from this, but I mean, just not exactly. I mean, Lone Star was able able to get a couple pick sixes of their own, but they still only were able to muster 31 points overall. Just not what you've come to expect from the Rangers, given their success over the years.
No, I think you saw a degree of rust, which you saw a lot of. I mean, this is early on, especially these first couple of weeks, you're going to see the effects of having no spring ball, even no 7-on-7, of being limited in what you can do here early on. And, we kind of mentioned earlier the Randy Jackson effect. I mean, how at North Corner, he's established himself as one of the most interesting, but also one of the most successful coaches that we've had kind of bounce in and out of our coverage area. I brought up the story from several years ago when Poteet went from, basically winning one game in 2 years, and Randy Jackson and his staff take over and they go to the state semifinals and almost beat Aledo, traditional powerhouse Aledo. And so, he's got that North Forney team now. He's going to have him playing with confidence. You mentioned some of their big plays. I thought another interesting number was they averaged only 3.1 yards per rush, but they had 51 carries, which tells you that they were able to run the clock to keep the ball out of Garrett Rangel's hands. He only threw for just a shade over 200 yards, and so once they got up, like you say, 21-3, I think they were just by going by the numbers. Obviously, we weren't at the game, but it sounds to me like they were just going to pound the ball on the ground, run that clock, play keep away, and they were able to do just enough to keep possession and then able to hold off until the end. But obviously, first game, Coach Rayburn over there at Lone Star is going to use this as motivation.
Absolutely.
To get those guys back. They have their sights set on playing in January. Sounds so odd to still say that now, but they are a team that believes that they can be raising the state championship trophy at the end. So they're gonna use this as motivation. They're gonna use this as a blueprint for what they need to improve on, and they're gonna be better. They're gonna be fine going forward.
They'll have to improve on. Said with Rangel, just again, you mentioned just a shade over 200 yards. Run game never got going for them either. Just 1.5 yards per carry essentially. And just the execution in moments like right before the half. They get stuffed on a goal line stand at the 1 yard line. And just a chance to really kind of get a little bit of momentum on your side heading into the second half, because the defense was able to finally get some stuff going there in the second half and only held them to 7 points. But again, that's just a 21-3 hole, just a little bit too much to climb out of. And, again, fair play to North Forney for making the stops on defense that they were able to and just kind of jumping on them early and just kind of taking them out of your comfort zone. And yeah, like you mentioned, obviously kind of, righting the ship next week is not going to come easy. They have Aledo up next. Aledo, who made a very short work of Weatherford 70-7. I was just checking. Lone Star has not lost consecutive games since October of 2014. So it's been a hot minute, and obviously going on the road, they will be underdogs in that game for sure, especially with what happened last week. So, just it's just one of those games that, I don't know, from a competitive standpoint, kind of what you enter as far as expectations goes, but it's, that's obviously not exactly the most welcoming of opponents if you're trying to look as far as a bounce back opportunity. But you know what? Maybe you have a spirited showing there, and all of a sudden, you're feeling a little bit more back on track than you otherwise had after that North Forney game. So obviously it was pretty surprising though to see Lone Star already taking a loss so early into the season. As far as the games that y'all were at, what was just one notable takeaway from something that you guys were able to see last week?
Defense.
There you go. That's a good way to start.
Yeah. We were talking about the Frisco game last year and last week on our podcast, and guys, do we expect a 17-14 game at all, just based on like what we're predicting?
Betting, if you're just going to place an over/under on that, I'm sure you're probably putting it somewhere in the 60s. And
oh yeah, people in Vegas probably lost a lot of money on that game. But it's you got to give credit to Frisco's defense. To hold them to like less than 300 yards of offense when they averaged like almost 450 a year ago, that's a huge. Even though it's a season opener, you didn't have a spring practice and the 7-on-7. That's huge right there. Yeah. That's a huge confidence booster, especially a team that went as deep as it did in the playoffs last year in Independence. And I looked it up too, and Frisco, they had a really good defense last year as well too. And the last 8 games of the year, they allowed 17 or fewer points in every single game.
Maybe we should have seen this coming.
Huh?
So maybe we should have seen this coming.
Maybe I should have looked at that just a little bit more. But Independence, they started this game really strong. They got a touchdown on their first drive. They actually had a 76-yard touchdown that got negated by an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, unfortunately. But a couple plays later, Jaden Orr, who rushed for almost 100 yards at the game, finished with 94, got a 53-yard touchdown run right there. So it looks like, at that time right there, it looks like, okay, Independence's offense has got it going, and it looks like they're going to, continue where they left off from last year. But I mean, as the game went along, it looks like Frisco just got a little bit more comfortable with their defense, trying to figure out what Independence is going to do offensively, and especially during the second half. Independence only had 88 yards of offense in the second half.
Wow.
And 39 of those came on a run by Braylon Braxton. So that just shows you how good Frisco's defense was in the second half.
It sounds like your game Friday was very defensive-oriented as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, same. Lake Dallas and Denton. Denton was a team that had a lot of starters coming back, too. I think so. Read somewhere they had seven.
They're one of the most experienced teams in just terms of sheer returning starters. As stacked as that district is over in 5A Division I, I think Denton either had the most or the second most returning starters.
And the thing with what kind of hurt Denton on Friday is that their starting center was out, so they had a lot of issues with snapping the ball.
Yeah, you'll see that a lot at the high school level.
Yeah,
you will see that a lot, especially early in the season.
Early in the season, yeah. They both of these teams combined for 11 fumbles.
Oh,
so yeah, it was pretty ugly. As far as the fumbling was concerned, but it was a tie game going into the half right there, 3-3. It looks like Dallas kind of lost some momentum going into right at the half because they had a fumble close to midfield right there, and then Denton proceeded to turn that into a field goal to turn it into 3-3. At the halftime. So I was a little bit concerned. I'm like, how is Lake Dallas going to be able to respond to this little adversity? But, I mean, you got to give them credit the way they came out in the second half. One thing that they did is they really sped up the tempo on offense right there, which Coach Young said is kind of their bread and butter right there. They got 17 third-quarter points, and they put the game away.
Yeah, Devin, you were on Friday at what was one of our contenders for Game of the Week with Coppell versus Mesquite. Did that game kind of meet your expectations, or just why did you feel coming away from that one?
It was a typical Week 1 game. And just looking around, same thing with North Mesquite on Thursday. There's a lot of penalties. A lot of drop passes. That's just what you expect on any Week 1 game, let alone one that we've had to deal with the pandemic and stuff. That's why, wins and losses are always important, but during non-district, there's other things that play as well.
For sure.
And especially given the fact that these guys have not been on a normal schedule. That's why I think this week coming up is so important in terms of a team's kind of outlook for the rest of the season because, again, it's not necessarily about the wins and losses, I don't think. They want that first game of tape to go in and watch it, and they want to see how they improve, how they expand, how they react to a second week. So I think you're going to learn a lot more about every team that's out there. Certainly everybody I was at Coppell and Mesquite. I think that Coppell, just the experience they have on offense, was kind of able to be the difference in the game. Ryan Walker had a nice game. He's an experienced guy, didn't make mistakes, whereas Mesquite is trying to break in two guys. They don't have a definite starter yet. Okay. They played Hunter Nucci for a while. He actually got the start. Chance Edwards came in later, made a couple of nice throws on deep balls. But, it was just kind of hard developing that consistency through the air, whereas Coppell, with the balance, with the ground game, and, with Walker and KJ Liggins and Anthony Black and some of those guys outside, Coppell's got a very well-rounded, nice offense. And, I know it's a program that's had a lot of success over the years in terms of making the playoffs, and they actually were, edged out last year, so they kind of have that, or they had the motivation going forward. And, so again, it's a nice building block piece. But I think this week's games, for the people who played last week, I said we have a couple of districts. Garland ISD didn't play last week, so they're just going into that Week 1 this week. But really curious to see how some of these teams make the progression from Week 1 to Week 2.
For my game on Friday, it was what was voted on as our game of the week last week, Plano and McKinney. And it's always a nice thing when the game of the week actually lives up to the billing, because this might be, pound for pound, maybe the most entertaining game I cover all season. It's just it was basically, like I told you this before, Devin, it was basically like a kind of a cover song of the Plano East, formerly known as John Tyler, football game back in 1994, one of the most famous high school games in the history of Texas. And in the sense that, McKinney jumps out to this monstrous lead, 21-0, and they just look amazing. Samson Nazarko, the quarterback, just Plano's having a really tough time kind of keeping up with his speed. He gets a couple rushing touchdowns early on. Plano didn't score until there were 57 seconds left in the first half. Tylen Hines was finally able to break free, and he gets a 50-yard run. They're trailing 28-7 with about 6 minutes left in the third quarter, and then all of a sudden, just the light bulb clicks on for Plano, and they just go on a run of 28 unanswered points. Tylen Hines, their star running back, he just has some absolute highlight reel runs and catches and whatnot. And there was no keeping up with him, and just the job that he did making that McKinney defense miss. He ends the game with 173 total yards of offense and 3 touchdowns. Their quarterback Oliver Towns, he was making some timely plays through the air and on the ground. I want to say during a stretch there in the second half, they converted 5 of 6 on third down, and then the one that they didn't convert, they were able to then score a touchdown on fourth down on a swing pass from Towns to Hines, and then just like that, with under a minute to go in the game, Oliver Towns finds Kamari Spivey over the middle for a 19-yard touchdown, and in a game that was 28-7 at one point, it's 35-28. In favor of Plano. So just this wild comeback by Plano. You're thinking just, wow, what a lift in this first game of the Todd Ford era to see that kind of fight, that kind of resilience. And then we get to the sequence of the game. So the way this panned out was actually pretty interesting. So Plano on the ensuing kickoff, they initially go for a kind of a high pooch kick, and then McKinney's able to return that to around like the 45-yard line or so. Plano was called for offsides on the kickoff. So instead of declining the penalty and just getting the ball near midfield, head coach Marcus Shavers opts to have Plano re-kick. And that leads to an 82-yard touchdown kickoff return for a touchdown by Cameron Rivas, who catches the ball just inside one sideline. The ball was so close to bouncing out of bounds. He just is able to stay in bounds. He gets the ball, immediately runs to the opposing sideline, and is able to just weave his way through. And after a while, you're just like, holy crap, there's an avenue for him to get to the end zone. And then just like that, with 33 seconds left, he scores the touchdown to pull them within 1 point. McKinney then decides to double down on the fortune, and they go for 2 points. They go for the 2-point conversion, and then R.J. Carver, who just had his way with Plano's defense, he averaged 7.5 yards per carry, had right around 150 yards rushing. He's able to barrel through. I think he broke 2-3 tackles just to pick up the requisite yardage, but he's able to just squeak over the goal line for the 2-point conversion, and McKinney ultimately wins the game 36-35. So, talking with Coach Shavers afterwards, he attributed at least the lackluster second half from McKinney just to basically said their conditioning, just wasn't where it needed to be. And that's another thing, with what the pandemic has done in the abnormal off season, just how, where teams are going to be at from a conditioning standpoint. So that they got to get better there. One thing just kind of going back through the play-by-play, one thing that really did kind of stand out is talking about R.J. Carver and just the job that he did kind of putting them ahead there at the end. And again, like I said, he averaged 7.5 yards per carry during Plano's comeback effort. Carver only touched the ball 3 times. So there were stretches where you're trying to run a little clock, and they just couldn't get the ball in his hands enough. And he was a guy who, again, Plano really didn't have much of an answer for, so they probably could have saved themselves a bit of stress there late by going to R.J. Carver a little bit more. But obviously they're going to need a lot more consistency, though, because they got Marcus rolling into town, and Marcus looked great. They 48-31 in their first game, a lopsided win over a Jesuit team that's projected to win its district. Garrett Nussmeier looked like a potential MVP candidate. So that's going to be a challenge for McKinney for sure. With Plano, you're impressed by the resilience, to fight back given those circumstances, and it's again, like, we'll see kind of in the coming weeks as far as which side of the coin Plano really falls on, because it looked like a team that was playing in a brand new system to start, and then if you're being an optimist, you say that they got a little bit more comfortable, found their rhythm, and then if this is what the Plano offense is going to look like going forward, then rock and roll. But now you just actually have to see it. They play Rowlett on Thursday. That's a game that's been kind of up and down in recent years. I think they've split the last 4 meetings or whatnot. So it'll be Rowlett's first game.
Yeah.
So there is that. But nevertheless, with Plano, just kind of something to be, because you'll be out at that game, Devin, so something to kind of keep an eye on how Plano starts that game. Just nevertheless, though, a very, very dramatic way to begin the Todd Ford era, to say the least. We'll just have to see how much of that second half kind of carries over, and if that truly is what Plano becomes this season. Because, when they were rolling, it was a sight to see. Talon Hines was he was a human highlight reel, and Oliver Towns was, just making just timely play after timely play. It was certainly encouraging, but obviously, the end there, I can't even imagine how many times that coaching staff has gone back to look at that kickoff return and just what the hell broke down there. Because, it really did feel like you had a kind of a storybook start to the Todd Ford era, and now, playing ultimately those still 0-1 to start the year. One thing I wanted to do is for our picket line, every week for the picket line, we pick 10 in-market games, we make our predictions and put them on our website. They're in the papers and whatnot, and it's always, because we get on the podcast, and we did this on Thursday, but we always, there were 5 games that we would sit down and really kind of break down and, really kind of hammer through and then give our picks and some really well-reasoned thoughts on why we think that it's going to go in one direction. And then you have instances where, some of us, look like geniuses after it all, and then other times you're just like, what the hell was I thinking? How could I have possibly been so off? And, you have moments like that's especially going to happen early on because, again, it's week 1. We're still kind of getting a feel for these teams. But there were a few teams that I felt like it was necessary to apologize to, at least on my end. Some picket line regret coming from this side of the table, because there were a few that, I was just way off on. Lovejoy and John Paul. Man, Lovejoy began the Chris Ross era on an emphatic note. John Paul, with all the success they had last season, punching up in weight with their toughest non-district game ever, playing a Class 5A program, and not only that, but a Class 5A program that makes the playoffs pretty routinely. And Lovejoy just put it on them. And this one was over early on. The final score was 52-22. The John Paul quarterback situation, because this was obviously, we mentioned, their quarterback, Grayson James, he transferred to Duncanville during the offseason, and they had a few guys that had shown some promise, and they were just kind of working through. But this is something that you're kind of not using the preseason for to kind of figure this out. John Paul played 3 different quarterbacks against Lovejoy and just could not find any sort of rhythm with much of anything. They used 3 quarterbacks. Hayden Ferguson got the start, but they also used Drew Faulkner, Chase Washington. They both combined to all 3 of them combined to throw 4 interceptions. So that didn't do the defense any favors. Lovejoy just had its way with John Paul. So this was the one thing, like I specifically kind of hammered out in this, was thinking that just the talent in John Paul's secondary would be enough to slow down Ralph Rucker, the quarterback, and Reed Westervelt in that Lovejoy passing attack. Nope. Ralph Rucker had almost 300 yards on 75% completions. Reed Westervelt tore it up, 7 catches, 189 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, my bad, Lovejoy. And then Rockwall Heath in Louisville. That was another one that a very, very, a very entertaining game. A game that sounds like it took a day or two to finish, just with 72-52 and over 1,000 yards of offense. And Heath hey, there's a lot of hype surrounding this Rockwall Heath team, especially with what they have coming back on offense. And one game in against a team that had made the playoffs the last couple of years. They looked as advertised, and they got some help from their defense and on special teams. They started off the game with a kickoff return for a touchdown. They had a defensive score. They had a pick 6, in the second quarter, and then they blocked an extra point. They blocked an extra point that they then returned, for a few points. So, Rockwall Heath, as advertised, man. And Louisville still did its thing too. They had over 600 yards, but you're just kind of getting a sense of what it's going to be like to play this Heath team this year.
Rockwall Heath and Rockwall might last 5 hours.
Yeah. No kidding.
It may be first one to 100 wins. Yeah. It's going to be a track meet.
I have to apologize to some riders who are going to miss their deadlines.
Yeah.
It's just one of those cases where it's kind of like that McKinney North team last year, where like what Kendrick would always say on the podcast, you got to score 40 just to beat them. And if they're giving up 52, it doesn't look great on paper for the defense. But heck, obviously they're not going to average 70 plus a game. But still, we know with the potential of that offense, with the continuity that they have with Josh Hoover and Zach Evans, Corbin Cleveland, on that crew, and they looked outstanding. I mean, Louisville had had some big, statistical producers as well. Damian Martinez, the running back, he had 264 yards and 5 touchdowns. Huh. That's outstanding. No matter the opponent, but it's been a tough road to hoe for the Louisville defense. I was looking, obviously the personnel's changed, but if you go back to last season, their last 4 games, which include games against Hebron, Marcus, the playoff game against Southlake, and then against Heath. If you take away the points that were allowed on defense and special teams on last Friday, that defense is allowing 57 points per game their last 4 games out. So.
Yeah, but obviously that's an area that they've got to improve on, and that's what this time of year is for. So they'll be fine.
So, but yes, not the best start to Louisville. Obviously, still plenty of opportunities though to improve going forward. So where those were a couple games that were certainly instilled some picket line regret. There was one pick though that I was kind of anxious to see if it would pan out. Felt like I was going out on a bit of a limb, just given this program's recent history. Plano West, 1-0. The Plano West Wolves were able to get a 28-0 victory over Wiley. Not sure, if that was forecast by many prognosticators out there, but nevertheless, though, Plano West, which not far removed from going more than 3 years in between wins. They get their first season opening win since 2005, their first shutout win since 2008. Just a continuation of a bizarre statistic. Wiley, oddly enough, has not won its season opener since 2010. So that streak, that slump continues. This was, as evidence, though, an absolute standout performance, though, from that defense. They only allowed 53 yards, I should say. They got a fumble return late by Jacob Stevens. Tabor Yates, their running back, who really came on strong over the second half of last season. He had a couple rushing touchdowns. They had a lot of guys in contention for that quarterback spot. Greg Drawn winds up getting the start, and he looks solid. You already see the potential chemistry with him and Jackson Stambaugh, who has a 50-yard touchdown pass to kind of get the ball rolling there in the second quarter. Just a really encouraging note to start the year for Plano West. Again, not really sure what it means kind of going forward, but for a program that, again, was able to, exercise a 34-game losing streak late last season with that win against Plano East. It's been well documented on the podcast what that program has been through, just kind of trying to rebuild itself into relevance. And just, to start off the second year under Tyler Sukup with just a performance like that, no matter the opponent. Now, I know Wiley's got a new head coach, and they're a little low on returning experience as well, but it certainly does build the kind of confidence that you need going forward, just because, you look at the rest of their non-district schedule, it's not out of the question. They could be 3-0 heading into district play. They've got North Mesquite and Little Elm, a far more manageable non-district schedule than what they've had over the years. That was something else that didn't do them any favors when they were slumping, because in addition to being in pretty challenging districts, you're playing against teams like Frisco Reedy and like Hebron and Mesquite, and just really good teams that are used to competing in the playoffs. And you're in the process of having one of the longest losing streaks in the state at the time. So they're playing teams that are a little bit more reasonable from a competitive level standpoint as far as where they're at right now. So just to see it already make good with a performance like that, just encouraging stuff going forward for the program as they look to try to, make some improvements in their second year under Sukup. Was there anything else that jumped out to you guys, or we want to call it a day?
In terms of apologizing for, if anything, those teams need to be apologizing for me by not coming through when I picked. No, I'm just kidding about that. No,
do we want to collectively apologize to Frisco for picking them to?
Yeah, or maybe it's just a jinx, whatnot. No, I'm going to defer. I don't have anything. The picks that were wrong, I would have made. I would have made it probably 99 times out of 100. I would have had Lone Star winning that game. I would have had, Frisco, and there was a couple vocal Frisco fans on Twitter that let both you and I know that.
Oh crap!
Yeah, that was. I saw.
I didn't see that.
On Friday nights, it's going so fast.
Yeah.
Especially about 10 o'clock when these games are wrapping up. 9:30, 10 o'clock, and it's just. But I happened to see a couple when they pulled it out that kind of. And I'll go back and find them.
Okay.
But they were kind of directed. Said, yeah, y'all. You picket line people, and now I said, okay, yeah, we deserve that,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
like I say, and that was a tough decision because Frisco is a very good team. I do think that they have a point in that we did talk a lot about Lone Star, we did talk a lot about Independence in terms of not just what they've done recently, but what their kind of thoughts on this season, their goals. Frisco, I mean, we didn't say enough about them. They're a favorite to win their district as well.
Absolutely.
And we mentioned them, and maybe we need to start talking a little more Frisco in the coming weeks, or we'll be reminded of it.
I will say, though, for the picket line, and I did go back to research this, it took 5 years, but we finally picked the Plano-McKinney game correctly. It took 5 years and a crazy ending that hardly seemed in the cards. But yes, because I went back and said back in 2016, we basically have been unanimous every year, and then the other team has won the game. So we finally were on the right side of that equation. Let's see, anything else you want to add, David, or are we going to head on home?
I think you guys got hit the nail on the head with the Frisco team right there, and I'm pretty sure I haven't been around yet to get some stuff from the Frisco fans right there. But I want to apologize as well too, guys. I mean, what a performance! I mean, Jeff Harbert's done an amazing job in his second year with this program. So, and that defense, the way they rushed the passer right there, I mean, it gave Independence's offensive line a lot of problems in that game. So,
it's been a tricky offseason for us too. We're still shaking off our rust.
I am full of rust, and I still need a couple of weeks more to knock it off.
So yes, week 1 is in the books. Got obviously some big stuff to preview though later on in the week for week 2. We'll be back on Thursday to do exactly that. In the meantime, folks, there is our game of the week poll up on the website, starlocalmedia.com. Go vote for which one we should give a nice little in-depth preview for on Thursday. Until then, folks, take care. We'll talk to y'all later.